So good evening. My name is Mark Mamagonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs at this institution, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. And on behalf of NAASR and the co-sponsors of tonight's program, the Tekeyan Cultural Association Boston chapter and the Belmont Public Library, thank you for being with us. And I would like to invite our friend and colleague from the Tekeyan, Aida Yavshayan, to please come up and say a few words on behalf of our co-sponsor, the Tekeyan.
You're there, I'm here. My name is Aida Yavshayan. I'm the co-chair of the Tekeyan Cultural Association of Boston, along with Peter Balakian. On behalf of the executive director of the Tekeyan Cultural Association of the United States of America and Canada, as well as the managing editor of the Armenian Mirror Spectator newspaper, Aram Arkun, and all the executive committee members of our TCA Boston, I welcome you all to our literary evening co-sponsored with NAASR and Belmont Public Library. I'd like to mention that TCAs in general support literature through publications, primarily of a literary nature, book lecture tours, book signings, as well as through the pages of newspapers like the Armenian Mirror Spectator in Watertown, Massachusetts, Abaca in Montreal, Canada, and Sardarabad in Argentina. Aram, I, and our executive committee would like to thank you for attending and supporting. Would like to thank Pulitzer Prize winner for poetry, Peter Balakian, for presenting and discussing his newly published book, New York Trilogy. Would like to thank NAASR through Mark Mamagonian, the Director of Academic Affairs, and the Belmont Public Library for co-sponsoring. Thank you. Enjoy your literary evening.
Thank you. And for the Belmont Public Library, these are also very exciting days. If you drive up and down Concord Avenue, you will see that they are in the late stages of building a beautiful new building almost across the street from us. So in recent years, Concord Ave has really kind of classed up quite a bit between the new NAASR building, the new Belmont High School, the new public library, a new ice rink. It's great things happening here on Concord Avenue. So thank you again for those of you who are here with us, and for those of you who will be watching this online later, for we are recording but not live streaming, I want to say thank you as well, whoever you are. Over the past 5.5 years, I'm pleased and proud to say we've built up a considerable audience around the world who enjoy, and as many tell me, depend on access to these programs online. It's incredibly gratifying to hear this, of course, but it's also created the expectation that every program we are involved in everywhere has to be live streamed. Most are, but occasionally there are reasons why it is not done, and there's also something to be said, I hope those of you who are here tonight will agree, in being present and together in person. Having said that, let me mention only the next couple of events that will be taking place here at NAASR, but know that there are many more coming up in other places, online and otherwise, and you should be on our email list to be fully in the loop. So a week from today, November 13th, in this room, we will have a film screening and discussion with filmmaker Stephanie Ayanyan and watch her documentary, Whatever Dreams They Had. And this is co-sponsored by NAASR and the Holy Cross Armenian Catholic Church of Belmont. And it's a really wonderful film about an Armenian Catholic priest from Aleppo in California and his outreach to the local immigrant community there, not merely the Armenian immigrant community, but the immigrant community generally. It's very moving, very powerful, and I really encourage you to come come watch and meet Stephanie. On Wednesday, November 19th, here in this room, also online, we will have our 5th annual Professor Charles B. Garabedian lecture given by Benjamin Alexander, entitled Ararat in America, Armenian-American Culture and Politics in the 20th Century. Again, a hybrid event here. In addition to these, this coming Saturday, 2 days from now, we will hold our 71st Annual Assembly of Members here at NAASR and online. You must be a current member with dues paid to participate fully and vote. If you're not already a member, please join. How about now? It's easy. Go to our website and join. And if you are a member or become one tonight, please sign in on the sheet on the table in the lobby, which you perhaps already signed in, because one lucky NAASR member will win a signed copy of Peter Balakian's New York Trilogy. And I want to encourage everybody here tonight to purchase a copy of the book as well, which will be on sale tonight for 20% off for everyone and in the solarium following the program. And I know that Peter will be very happy to sign the book for you. Sorry, but there's one other sad piece of business that I must attend to. This morning, we learned that a very dear friend and remarkable man, Paul Ignatius, passed away, a few days short of his 105th birthday. Paul served for 8 years in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations as Assistant Secretary of the Army, Undersecretary of the Army, and Assistant Secretary of Defense, and then finally as Secretary of the Navy. He served subsequently as president of the Washington Post for 2 years and as president of the Air Transport Association for 15 years. One could recite at considerable length his honors and distinctions. Let me just mention one. In 2016, the U.S. Navy launched the USS Paul Ignatius, a naval destroyer named in his honor. He was a descendant of Armenians from the Kharpert region who settled in Glendale, California. He is the author of the memoirs On Board, My Life in the Navy, Government and Business, and Now I Know in Part, and the collection of essays 5x3, 15 books by 3 great Armenian writers. And I had the privilege of working with Paul on the latter 2 books and getting to know him over the years, and he was an amazing, amazing man. And we will miss him. He was a NAASR member for many years and a member of the leadership circle, as well as the father of our former executive director, Sarah Ignatius, and her 3 siblings. So let's take a moment to remember Paul. A 104 years and 360 days is a pretty good run, so he didn't get cheated. Let me turn the page and turn to tonight's speaker. Over the past 30 years, the earliest I can find is from 1996, NAASR has had the opportunity to welcome Peter Balakian to speak, to present his research, to present his poetry, to talk to us about his ideas and his work. On many of those occasions, I've had the privilege to introduce him, and I'm happy to do so again tonight. Peter is the Donald M. and Constance H. Rebar Professor of the Humanities in the Department of English at Colgate University. He's the author of many books in various genres, including The Burning Tigress, The Armenian Genocide in America's Response, which won the Raphael Lemkin Prize, the amazing memoir Black Dog of Fate, winner of the Penn Albarand Award for Memoir, and many works of poetry, including Ozone Journal, winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, and his current book, New York Trilogy, as well as the collaborative translations of Grigoris Balakian's Armenian Golgotha and the ruins of Ani and Siamanto's Bloody News from My Friend. Peter has been a familiar presence in the Armenian American community for decades, and for many of us who are also part of that world, we may be hindered through familiarity from fully recognizing his impact in the larger world of American literature, although his having been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry ought to have clued us all in. I'm not 100% sure how many Armenian Americans have won Pulitzer Prizes of any kind, but I'm proud that William Saroyan, who won and rejected the Pulitzer Prize for Drama in 1940, spoke 70 years ago at a historic NAASR event when we launched the campaign to establish the first chair in Armenian Studies at Harvard. That Ben Bagdikian, who won a Pulitzer Prize for Journalism in 1953, was the keynote speaker at our 40th anniversary gala in 1995. And Stephen Kirkjian, who has won 3 Pulitzer Prizes for journalism, is a member of our board of directors. And Peter Balakian is here tonight. It's a pretty good honor roll there. Maybe there are others that I don't know about. I will be happy to add them to the list, but let's welcome the one we do have, Peter Balakian.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you always for welcoming me here. I actually don't remember the first time I spoke at NAASR, but I can remember a kind of really down-home joint with Manuk Young. You know, it was down home, it was gemütlich, it was lovely, but it wasn't this amazing place and amazing space, which is, of course, really, a shrine on the Armenian cultural map. So it's always great to be here. And Tekeyan Society and Belmont Public Library, thank you. Look, the fact that one of the really superb Armenian poet, Vahan Tekeyan, has a society in his name. It fills me with joy. I teach poems in translation, Armenian poems in translation. You know Tekeyan's poem on a sonata of Beethoven, or Country of Dust, or There Are Boys. Right, you know some of these poems, those of you who are in the Tekeyan. So that's just really a high to be, connected to our poetic tradition. I feel it's a particular moment in American life, and I'm making a public statement at all my readings and events this year. As an American writer and university professor of 45 years, I feel it's my obligation to witness what's happening to our democracy. And I believe this is well beyond party identities and party politics. Donald Trump's assaults on universities and higher education, on secondary education and civic culture, including museums and libraries, through coercion and tactics that resemble extortion, and are anti-democratic and often violations of the First Amendment, and they will not work. Critical thinking and knowledge production in our democratic educational structures is a sedimentary rock with layers embedded of several hundred years of culture and intellectual life. Without that culture and our open pluralistic systems of learning, we would not have a democracy. And to falsify history, as this president and his followers are doing, is to undermine the foundations of fact, knowledge, moral understanding, and our future. I'm reminded that Nazism, although violently destructive, was not able to destroy the Enlightenment tradition in Germany. Mark mentioned the years I've had the privilege to speak to Armenian communities worldwide, and worldwide as well as in America. And it's probably now a bit over 40 years. So I just also want to say, when I greet Armenian communities everywhere. What an honor it has been to be with you and to be speaking to you, with you, and together. I do recognize that Armenian politics and history is never without struggle. It is always challenging, but we are an extraordinary ancient civilization. We can say 2,500 years with a sense of confidence. Our resilience, our cultural depth, our intellectual achievements are what keep us on the map today. So it's a joy. Thanks for having me. Now, I want to talk about my new book. And I want to explain some things about it. I want to explain how it works. And I do want to focus on the Armenian threads. So we've used, Mark and I were talking about the idea of from Manhattan to Deir Zor. I am going to move between those poles with a particular, sense of us being together in our community. So first, let me say this is a long poem. Okay, it's a poem in 3 books and 143 sections. And long poems are as old as civilization, right? I mean, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Gilgamesh, the Aeneid, or David of Sassoon. But the modern long poem is a little different. It starts really with the great American poet Walt Whitman. And that long poem works by embedded sections that have a lyric sequential unfolding. Okay, it's a different form. And so I know this may seem new to all of you, but I want you to feel totally comfortable with my 143 section long poem because it's fun and there are a lot of stories in it. And Whitman, how many of you have read some Whitman? Whitman's not good. Whitman's not a stranger to you. I always like to tell my students that the invention of free verse, okay, to be distinguished from blank verse, which is something that the great Milton practiced, unrhymed iambic pentameter, but free verse, the ceiling's off. You write organically. For Whitman, this was an American rebellion against British metrics. So free verse and the sequential long poem, I think, is a great American invention. As original and important as the skyscraper, the suspension bridge, jazz, baseball, the cheeseburger. I don't know if we can claim the hamburger, but I think we can claim the cheeseburger. And I think the sequential long poem and free verse are part of that. So I want you to keep that in mind, that this is a piece of American culture that has gone global since Whitman took over the modernity of poetry. Okay, so this book is composed of 3 long poems that I wrote between 2003 and 2020. And each long poem came out in an earlier book, but I don't want that to prevent you from buying this book, because this is the real deal. This has the 3 together as they were conceived to make the long poem. All right, so for me, a very important moment to get the 3 together as New York Trilogy, which I had envisioned from the time I completed the first poem, A Train, Ziggurat Elegy. The other, Ozone Journal, came second, and No Sign came third. Even though Ozone Journal and No Sign are also the names of the whole book collections, they are the names of the long poems as well. Now, The whole poem explores one persona's journey. I say persona to distinguish myself as the autobiographical writer from the character created in the work of literature. There's a tendency for audiences to think that everything in a poem is autobiographical, and that's not true. A lot of the lyric poetry of the modern era does come out of very personal, intimate experience. The word confessional became popular in the 1950s to identify poets like Robert Lowell, Allen Ginsberg, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, your own Anne Sexton from the town of Weston, as you know. Confessional, came to define this kind of intimate, personal tone. So, by which I want to say that the self created in a poem is a composite. There's often personal, autobiographical experience in that poem. That could be the wellspring for the poem. But then literary writers are writers of imagination. So we're creating, so there's a recipe in a poem between the personal and the invented. I say that. So this persona, it's a journey from the late 1960s into the early 21st century that evolves from a series of personal experiences, many of which are set in Manhattan and on the onlooking New Jersey Palisades, the great cliffs on the Hudson. The persona is impacted by various historical events: the Armenian Genocide, Hiroshima, the Vietnam War, the AIDS epidemic, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the war in Iraq, the geoclimate crisis, and also intimate relationships, encounters with literature, music, and art. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, but I want to put it out before you. Now, what I want to also underscore about how to read this poem, and I promise you, it's fun reading, and I know you're going to be up at night reading it to each other or reading it to yourself. Multi-sequencing, for me, is the key of the form. So there are 4 narratives in each section, or each of the books, 4 narratives. And you shuttle forward every few sections and you pick up the narrative and you're going to start making a weave out of it. So here's the 4 narratives, and they're in conversation with each other. So here are the 4 narratives in book 1. In the Ziggurat poem. The excavation of the Ziggurat at Ur by the great British archaeologist Leonard Woolley, the building of the World Trade Towers, the breakup of a relationship, and a TV journalist injured in the Iraq War. In book 2, a forensic expedition with a TV crew to find the skeletal remains of Armenians from the Armenian Genocide in the Deir Zor Desert. Now that was an event I did. I went with Bob Simon in 60 Minutes, some of you know, to Deir Zor in 2009, and the segment is up there for you to watch. It aired in 2010. 2, a slice of jazz history from the career of the legendary jazz and blues producer at Columbia Records, George Avakian, who was a good friend of mine, and with whom I did 12 hours of interviews. I call him Jerry in the poem, because I'm always trying to, build in that little fictional space. A cousin dying of AIDS and the breakup of a marriage. In book 3, No Sign, The narratives are a conversation between a long estranged couple and their memory of the past, of their past. The film Hiroshima Mon Amour, the great film by Alain Resnais and Marguerite Duras. The climate change crisis, that also gets into the geological origins of Earth, and the aftermath of the Vietnam War. Okay, so those are the threads that are moving through the 3 books. It feels better to read when I get down to the, for a poet, this is like doing offensive tackle blocking. That's when we get down into the trenches of the work. So I want to give you a sense of how the poem works. So I'm going to start with the World Trade Towers and the Ziggurat and the cousin dying of AIDS in the opening of the first book, A Train Ziggurat Elegy. I will say again, as a biographical context here, that as a high school kid, my summer job I was a mail runner for a stevedoring company in Lower Manhattan, and I was a stock boy for that company. But where I ran mail around the city to pick up checks, especially from steamship companies that owed my company big sums of money so that we could get the checks into the bank before 3 p.m. because that was a lot of interest on checks that size. Today, those checks are $1 million checks, and they're probably just wired. But in those days, I was running around with them. And so while I'm doing this, 1967, 1968, 1969, 1970, I'm watching the World Trade Towers being built. In fact, I delivered mail to the Tower A, the North Tower, the first week it opened, 1971, I think it was. When the terrorist attacks happened, of course, we were all shattered by the horror of the event, and I became obsessed with the towers as architectural, as ziggurats. You get the thing between Leonard Woolley and the World Trade Towers, the ziggurats that mark civilization. And I was there watching them being built. Okay, 1. The tender head of the he-goat on the cover stares through the branches of a golden tree, and I'm just moving on a system of fuses while the fruit stands of Spanish Harlem fly above. And even now, remembering when we were here after Nixon waved goodbye and rose in the chopper, even now, seeing it through the double glass as Ur of the Chaldees, revised and updated, Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations at Ur, flares on the yellow cover in the momentary dark that wrapped our bodies up all night, like violent paint on the sheets, like the broken fire escape of our building. At 125th, the guy next to me reading Another Country. The white guy passed out in a suit and a brown bag. The steel screeches the tracks and the vaults light up. A lot of this is set on a subway. 2, to Woolley, the crash in Wall Street were a fata morgana of palms shattered in ice. He paid baksheesh to the locals and they kept digging, baked clay and gypsum. Woolley loved cow dung and mud plaster huts, the world from bottom up. Quote, we found a clay figurine of a pig. Spindle whorls of baked clay proved that thread was spun here. In the last days of Babylon, a mathematician gave 0 a name not far from where Woolley dug. No great thing comes without a curse, said Sophocles. So 0 equals hollow circle equals cylinder seal, quote, skulls and seeds, and all good things are round. Nabokov. 3, you made his lines, which were opaque as ashes, seem clear as our confusion. Quote, the diagonal blacks a broken body. It was after the show we walked from Tung Lai Shun to the Bowery to the bridge and back. I like bridges, Franz Klein said. If people want to see bridges in my lines, that's good. And when we fell into the shadow of the morning, why did we stop talking after all of it, after everything? You disappeared on the train reading Merleau-Ponty. I got lost in Queens on the E. 4, I ran mail a whole summer down Greenwich and West. Before it even started, before we roamed Radio Row for 78s of Ellington and the Blanton Trio, before the yin-yang of real estate under the Kensett skies over the river, the wrecking balls took Radio Row down. Florists, groceries, record shops, restaurants, the whole mid-century slid into a pit, and the sun made Gothic trees of the falling windows. Out of res ipsa loquitur, out of Port Authority and Chase, Rockefeller and Tobin, the Twin Towers rose from the garbage. So that's just a little nibble on how the first book opens. But I now want to begin with book 2, which opens in Syria in a hotel on the Euphrates. How many of you have been on the Euphrates? Anybody? A few of you? What a river. Man, what a river. That river was churning and turbulent when I was there in late April. And that trip was incredible, the 60 Minutes trip. And I want to remember the late, great Bob Simon, an amazing journalist. You saw him for many years on 60 Minutes. He survived imprisonment in Iran and China and Vietnam to get killed in a car crash on the West Side Highway by an out-of-control cab driver. How bizarre life is. But Bob Simon was really amazing. And if you watch the 60 Minutes segment, he just decimates the Turkish ambassador in the interview that closes the segment. It's really good. One, so this is Ozone Journal, book 2. 1, I woke to CFCs humming out of coils. I woke to a compressor in my head and the compressor in the wall that made cool air come out of the vents. I couldn't sleep, downloaded photos of the day to stare at them as if the sky were something I could breathe in. Not good times by the sea, but desert blue and cracked ground, some tumbleweed blowing into my jeans, green signs of Arabic letters looked like beautiful tributaries as they faded out along a road going to the Iraqi border, where oil refineries were firing on the horizon, where a border is a road, ending and beginning. 2, all day I was digging Armenian bones out of the desert with a TV crew that kept ducking the Mukhabarat, who trailed us in jeeps at night and joined us for arak and grilled goat under colored pennants and cracked lights in cafes where piles of herbs glistened back at me. I passed out from sun and arak and camel jokes. In a massive hotel, my room opened to the Euphrates that was churning in the moonlight. 3, when I woke, I was dreaming back to the 80s on Riverside Drive, where Ani was born on a bright spring day. In a decade of money and velvet, when the plastic voice of Sinatra floated through fern bars, where we lounged with wine spritzers and lemon drop martinis. It was silver palette and more than cuisine, with its encoded sense of ending, and the smoked sable at Barney Greengrass, where we took Ani for lunch on Sunday when the morning was lit up and open. 4, dreaming back to days, why here on the Black Euphrates at 4 a.m.? After our life went up in a blue flame as the gas jet died and we were gone to each other, the walls silent and the floorboards echoed. The U-Haul came and my books got rained on, and the flags were rippling for St. Gennaro. Thisbe and Pyramus disappeared as myth and symbol, and that summed it up. 5, those days, no dream, the squeaky cassette going on Jerry in Riverdale. When I arrived, the sky was graphed through phone wires and Amtrak cables. I was sitting beneath shelves of uncut masters, the 78s of 1940, when Jerry cut the modern LP and found the lost hot jazz of the 20s. I was staring at hanging Armenian rugs and the river glare on a photo of Miles Davis, almost liquid in the sepia emulsion of 1947, when the smoke spiraled into 3 deuces on 52nd at a table with Sterling Brown and Gillespie and Jerry, and he put it in his hammered speech, quote, John Hammond was so hated by the musicians, Miles cut him out of the photo and pasted Dizzy in. But that was before I got Miles interested in John Cage. 6, by noon I was leaning on the cotton white hospital wall, gazing at the islands of purple lesions on David's slightly swollen leg, the edema rising in his groin, the sheets strewn and the IV dripping blue down the snaking plastic tube. My year of magical thinking looped down the drain of my brain. Take care, cousin. I blew him a kiss. 7, before I was back at the English department table, feeling the post-mortem of the modern, the paradigm critique essential, but the artifact thrown out with the bathwater, over-fetishizing indeterminacy or depressed expression of late capitalism. Get Foucault and Trilling in bed. Give peace a chance. Gorky said, take a flat brush and work it till there are 2 hairs left. Now I'm going to skip forward. Let's see. Some of you know about George Avakian's remarkable career. Some, would you like me to say a couple things? George arrived in the States, I think he was 1 year old. His family got out of Tbilisi, Tiflis then, got out of the Soviet Union. They weren't caught up in the genocide. They arrived here, and George was one of those Armenian-American immigrant kids of the 1920s who fell in love with America through sports and jazz. His obsession with jazz, his father and brothers had a very successful Oriental rug business in Manhattan. So George is so gifted at music, that is, understanding it and writing about it. Benny Goodman befriends him, and when he's still a high school kid at Horace Mann, because of a brilliant essay that George had written about the Goodman Band when George was covering a concert of theirs at the Hotel Pennsylvania, in Manhattan on 7th Avenue. So I can go on this more when we talk afterward, but George really starts producing the first jazz long-playing album in history out of his Yale dorm room as a sophomore, when the president of Columbia Records finally gives in to him and says, okay, if you're so obsessed with having an LP of jazz with liner notes and narrative, then you go do it. So George, comes back, begins a career, and he was instrumental to making the modern era of jazz and blues. He was at Columbia Records through the 40s and the 50s. He then went to Decca, and I think ended up at RCA. But what an extraordinary figure he is, and his archives and papers are at the Lincoln Center Library and Museum. Okay, because I'm going to read some more sections with George gets, my whole immersion in jazz is inseparable from George in a way. So George gets into this poem. Okay, let me start here with a few more sections. 17, you remember the Carnegie Deli in New York, where pastrami sandwiches were a foot high, literally, and you could only eat part of it? They went under. 17. And then I was hunched under the celeb photos on the wall over an absurd pile of pastrami at the Carnegie. And a snippet fell out of my notebook. Quote, the measurements on board the Nathaniel B. Palmer showed that 1 hour exposure to light that is similar to the sun under the ozone hole is enough to completely stop all photosynthetic activity of plankton. Close quote. No plankton, no world. Who can take in the dread? And I'm already late to pick up Ani at dance class. 18. Jerry believed what the Greeks believed. Sound had color. And what Miles said, quote, the softer you play, the stronger it gets. When I got home, my daughter's voice was skidding along the fluctuating magnetic signal of the answering machine. Loneliness droned me to the beep, lulled me to sleep. 19. Before I woke to hammered silver air over the river, fish eye sun, irascible, hardtack, scarred and varnished, ozone, major factor in making life on Earth possible. O3, allotropic, oxidizing, disinfectant, poisonous, pale blue gas, sharp, irritating, ignited by UV rays. 20. Obsessive angles of light off stone in the Syrian desert. 5 a.m., camera crew. M and B, brilliant, making the narrative hang in the blind, white punctum. Boom mic dangles, a huge mouth in the sun. I mean, really, we had to get up at 3 a.m. because Michael Gavshon and Bob Simon were so obsessed with capturing 5 a.m. light in the Syrian desert for this, 7-minute segment. It's amazing the perfectionism of really wonderful filmmakers. So I think that's something that transfers to all of us artists. We have to wake up at 3 a.m. to catch the sun at 5 a.m. It's a good metaphor for the creative process. All right, I'm just going to read a few more sections from Ozone, and then conversation or whatever you wish. I wanted to are you doing okay with this? You still plugged in? Yeah. I know poetry can be challenging, and you don't have the book in front of you. I want to capture this amazing scene of George Avakian as a high school senior, now traveling with the Benny Goodman Band because they're so impressed with his brilliance and writing about jazz, okay? This is a pretty accurate, I mean, there's some things I have to do as a poet in making this scene, but the event is accurate. Section 36, quote, this is Jerry speaking. He's speaking to me because I'm recording him on this cassette in this poem. So you get the media in between. On a freezing night in January, I was 17, helping Benny Goodman, who was playing for the Spanish Loyalists at Columbus Circle. I crammed Lionel Hampton's xylophone and Gene Krupa's drums into a taxi. Caught my hand on the xylophone. The blood froze on the keys all the way up 6th Ave. Inside a makeshift room, I was the Jew, the Armenian, the horn-rimmed kid from prep school they thought was him. And they handed me a glass. They called for him who hadn't arrived, and so I raised a glass and shouted, "Muerte a Franco." The room pealed with joy. The light smoked up. The grappa burned me down. Peggy Lee appeared out of the smoke. Down the edge of a dark wall, bodies drifted through space. The winds hustled forward to the bar. We were the red hordes turning Catalonia into the American thing, into the Mistral where the guns drowned in the erratic tempo of waves, into the arms and legs that wrapped me up all night. "37, while our friends in Tribeca were buzzed on other stuff, we were high on the ripe river air of Friday nights as the bird-dazzled clouds floated over the GW. Our belief in Dylan Thomas's thunderous cadences, like backed-up water let loose over a barricade as we went down by the riverbank and were mad for the atmosphere, the collision, the sweetest of entries, the long pulsations before the sun broke in our heads like Rothko's yellow coating the flax. Under the Palisades at the boat basin, looking up at the bridge, at the Deco girders, dreaming of the Algonquin and Edmund Wilson in 1930s where the river was bridgeless. Down there on the bank, we were the bottom of the bowl, the sedimentary rock rolled, and the words were hulls of boats lapped by water. 40. The new kind of blue idea that Jerry claimed came out of Cage, with its modality of stretching time, with the Greek idea of fusing color and sound, which is what I felt as I walked south after the English department meeting into the hour when time becomes light. The chalice of the Chrysler building goes platinum. the river starts dusting down for bridge lights and traffic. Accretion, enumeration, excess, giving way to wrecked solitude and an idea of late day, this day, and after teaching, after the chalkboard staring back at me, the light warping through the glass of Grand Central. Everything goes Bohemian cobalt, Persian lapis, the Virgin's cloak, color of longing over mountains. That's how Miles drained his trumpet. Skipping down to section 42. At the Shadadeh Caves, where Armenians were asphyxiated in the summer of 1916, we're filming, and M is obsessed with light flickering down, affect of the punctum. While remaining a detail, the space fills up the whole picture. M, were thousands of Armenians stuffed in here? B, Fisk called them primitive gas chambers. M, drops the boom mic into darkness. Sand floats through light-chipped space. If you try to imagine death here, the detail is not the whole. The whole disappears. The cave is a black gullet swallowing itself, as it once did the bodies. So let me stop here for a moment and thank you for listening and open to questions and conversation.
If you don't mind doing so, we have a microphone. It makes it possible for people watching to in the future, it doesn't exist yet, to hear what you say. So if you're able to, please come up to the microphone. Feel free to recite or declaim or better yet, to ask a question. And I will ask a question. Peter, you've been teaching now for a good many years at Polegate.
And before.
And before. Do you find students respond the same way to the long form poems, to the invocations of, let me stop, just
To the long poem,
yeah.
to the long poem. Well, you know, Mark, I have taught a seminar on the long poem, the American long poem, many years. I'm not teaching it now, and the seminar is always full. So my students do. I mean, my students at Colgate are just marvelous students, and in the upper level seminar, that's, a very self-selecting crowd. So yes, I mean, I think so. Whitman remains very popular and important, I think, among students, but Whitman should be just an American landscape for everyone. The language is both complex and accessible. Whitman's one of those artists like Hemingway or Van Gogh or Picasso who has avant-garde depth, but a kind of common appeal. It's so I wish you Whitman wherever you are. Pick up Whitman. So yeah, the long poem's still very, very alive in the world I live in, Mark. Can you? They want you to go to the poem.
If you could just speak. First of all, thank you so much. This was wonderful, and so great to see you and hear what you've been working on. If you're able to speak about prose poetry and how that contrasts with the long poem and verse poetry stanza.
Yeah, great question. Thanks. Prose poetry is a particular subgenre of poetry. In prose poetry, the line is eschewed, so that the prose poem will read in a box form, which is to say, one major difference is the kinetic force of line pulsation, which is really important to the poem. You know, I mean, we work really hard at making lines. For a poet, that's similar to a composer making bars and measure, right? Measures and bars. I don't know. I've never composed music, but you get what I mean. So with the prose poem, you do away with the kinesis and the shape, but you maintain metaphor, image, figurative structures. We often call extended metaphors conceits. Prose poems often will maintain that conceit. And there's a kind of narrative speaking voice that's a bit, I hope, you know, seductive and special. So those are some reflections on the way the two different concepts work. Not one better than the other. I really always want to barnstorm for poetry wherever I am, because the art offers a culture and the self great things. That's why there's a Tekeyan society, because Tekeyan's poems spoke to Armenian communities and beyond for decades, for a century. You know, yeah, I mean, Tekeyan died in the 40s, as I recall, but he was writing in the teens, 20s, 30s, you know. So, the poem should be really important sustenance for cultures. And Armenian culture has, in a diaspora, has the advantage of having Armenian American writers, or Spanish American or French American, as well as Armenian.
What year did your first book come out? 78, 9?
The copyright says 79, but it didn't appear till the spring of 80.
Do you revisit your early work? And if you do, is it comfortable?
I don't visit things that early, Mark. There are a couple poems I might read once in a while from some early books, and one of them would be The History of Armenia, which for me was a groundbreaking poem, opened up my whole poetics into something new. You may know you don't need to, I hope, if you don't know it, I hope you'll find it and read it. But not much, no, I try to stay pretty much in the present decade, let's say.
Oh, please. Please do use the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. It was great.
Thanks.
Where do you get how do you start a poem?
Yeah, gosh, well, that's, you know, a question that could be an interesting 2-day seminar among poets, you know, to get together and listen to how artists work, of course, you know, is the question. But you're asking me how I, as a poet, work, and
Like specifically for that first.
you know, if Robert Frost wrote that a poem starts as a lump in the throat, a homesickness, a heart sickness, you can play with that in a way. But I think that, you know, as a poet, two things are happening to you. One is your medium is language. And for poets, language is kinetic. It's rhythmic. It's phrase-oriented. It's image-oriented. Phrase, image, kinesis, pulsations of sounds and rhythms. That's part of your, you know, your toolkit. The other part of it is, of course, some subject, some area, some stuffness is haunting you. So the two link. The stuff that's not letting you alone. It can be haunting as in bad, or it can be obsessing you in any way, great, joyous, wonderful, exciting, whatever the subject is. So that's where the imagination has its sparks, in the intersection of those two zones.
your reading very much. It's not easy to do that in front of any size group or cultural group, so thank you for that. And I remember that old quote, a poem should be not mean. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to answer her question, I guess it comes from the gut. But my question is, how is AI going to impact poetry from your perspective?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. First, just to note a poem should be not mean is something that's often said in workshops. But Yeats put it in a more formal way. He said, poems are never about things, they only embody. They embody an experience. So, when you're teaching a writing workshop to young writers, you're trying to get them away from thinking they have a message. Message comes later. Materials come first. Gorky spent decades just mixing colors and drawing compulsively. He has to do that. He has to draw compulsively. He has to mix colors. He'll work his way through stuff to get to where he got, So, yeah, it's the embodiment. It's the obsession with language. That's where you begin. That's what I think what you're noting by saying that. Look, I think my friend, the marvelous critic, nonfiction writer, and editor Sven Berkertz, who edited the Agni Review for many years here, that comes out of Boston University, a great international literary journal. Sven came out with an essay this summer called The Ring. And I'm using it in my classes now. It's only a 5-page essay. You can find it probably online. And among the things that Sven is writing about is how AI is not able to co-opt the three fundamentals that constitute the creative arts and the creative act. And I'm boiling this down into something pretty, basic, but the essay's excellent. One is the intuitive and the associative dimensions of imagination, the leaps that we make. That is connected to two, the rhythmic body chemistry that goes into any creativity. If you're a poet, if you're a writer, how is it, maybe some of you have had this experience, I hope you've had, even in many other analogous ways, how is it that the words got to the page before you knew how they got there? That happens all the time to writers. You don't have to be a poet, but poets have a special intensity toward that. But the words got there. You know that. You all know, you who write. Intuitive, associative. And Sven also notes a really brilliant passage by Virginia Woolf in which she's talking about body rhythms being responsible for that associative impact, that leap. 3, that's connected to the unconscious, which is where a piece of all artistic creativity and intellectual creativity emerges from. It's not all from the conscious brain, it's from the unconscious. Just thinking of Freud in the most basic brain psyche anatomy that he gave us. And Jung as well, who hopped on that unconscious. The unconscious is the intuitive psychic wellspring of the self. All of us are navigating with an unconscious day in and day out. For writers, it's a wellspring for our work. AI just has nothing to do with any of this. AI can give you stuff, and I know there are professions in which AI will be useful in a positive way. AI is certainly going to make chaos for us, complex chaos that we can't even imagine, from, denuding the landscape of workers to levels of fantasy and fiction that obscure our understanding of what is real. I don't know, our species is in trouble. But nevertheless, the good news is I don't think AI has much to do with real art. You know, it's true, a student could go to Chat GTP and say, write a sonnet about the moon. And Chat GTP can do that. That's not going to be real art. And I tell my students, look, if you're in this workshop, I teach more than workshops, but I do teach workshops. If you're in this workshop, you're here for authenticity. You're here to mine your psyche, your unconscious, your body rhythms. You're here to understand the associative dimensions of your mind. You have no interest in AI. If you have any interest in AI, please leave. And they read Sven's, I found Sven's short essay, 5-page essay, like really affected them.
What if we lose the ability to tell the difference?
I have no answers for that, but I don't think we can lose the ability to tell. I don't know if it's unknown, Mark, it's a wilderness, but I don't think we can lose the ability to tell the difference between, you know, the duende, the soul. If that happens, I don't know. Yes.
Thank you very much for that presentation and your reading, Peter. I have a question. You were talking about color and poetry, and so it made me think of synesthesia. And I wanted to ask you, what did the Greeks think about synesthesia, and how is that carried forward in your poetry?
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that the George Avakian Miles Davis section I read dealt a little bit with color and sound. You know, I haven't read a lot about this, but synesthesia, of course, is really an exciting dimension of just the things I was pointing to, which is the associative imagination, the intuitive, and the kind of blendings that the mind and language can do to bring us to deeper understanding. In a way, the poem I was reading from, Ozone Journal, ends with a kind of painterly, synesthetic moment. I can close with it if you want to. Maybe that'd be better than closing with the dead in the Shada Dev caves, but I couldn't resist reading that to all of you because it was so powerful. So I think synesthesia is exciting, and I love it when I find my way into a moment that enables me to blend those sensory dimensions. As for theories of sound and color, something I look forward to reading more about, but I don't have a wellspring here.
Can you say more about your interviews with Avakian and where they are and what they consist of?
Yeah, they're in my office. And I did them with two dear friends of mine who are Kara Roosh and Michael Coyle. Kara's a jazz producer and has her own record label. Her family has a record company. Michael is a terrific scholar of jazz and contemporary music. So the three of us went down and did these over the course of a year, 12, 13 years ago, can't remember exactly. George was so lucid. He lived to 97. He was very lucid, he's just an amazing guy. Anybody met George, knew George? Did you ever meet George? Just very perfect memory, and the stories of his own coming of age with music, growing up on the east side of New York City, of Manhattan, in the 20s and 30s. And they're great stories, the stories of walking into the president of Columbia Records office in Bridgeport, Connecticut, I believe it was. And, the president says to him, look, kid, if you're so obsessed with making an LP of jazz, we don't do that kind of stuff. This is 1938, 39. He said, yeah, we're into it was classical music was everything in this period. And the big companies had very elaborate classical albums with very meticulous narrative and line. And George is saying this needs to be done for jazz because this is the new great music of the now and the future. So I can just say George was an extraordinary guy who was visionary, who did amazing things to bring some great art to us all. And, he's not forgotten. There's a huge archive at Lincoln Center. Sure.
Can you talk about how you connected with Bob Simon, how that whole the story came about?
Oh, well, I had been writing Jeff Fager, the marvelous executive producer at 60 Minutes, about doing something on the Armenian genocide, and for years, and then the Jersey Palisades book came out, Armenian Golgotha, that I had worked collaboratively with Aris Sevag on. Aris did such an amazing job as the primary translator of Golgotha. And the new book interested Mr. Fager, and he thought that this is a moment maybe to make a hook in to something we could do. And he was very interested in the denial, the Turkish denial stuff, which always, was a kind of nightmarish and horrible and immoral as it is, also has this makes our history constantly contemporary. And so he thought, yeah, this could work. And Bob Simon apparently jumped on the idea of the show. And he called me out of the blue, and next thing I knew, we were having lunches in New York talking about how this might work. It was pretty exciting. Yeah.
Well, yes, Ron.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate your introductory statement about the state of higher education and what is being done
Thank you.
at universities, and just keep up the good fight. Just on a lighthearted note, nothing profound on my part, no questions, just that I'm a jazz lover, and I love your reference to Kind of Blue, that great 1954-55 album, Miles Davis, fantastic. And also the I believe it was the first really publicized, well-known, integrated jazz group with, it was Benny Goodman's quartet.
Okay.
Is that, I believe, 'cause I have the 78, the set.
Yeah, wow.
But the fourth artist, musician, was Teddy Wilson, the pianist.
Yeah.
And he used to play in Boston at the Copley Plaza Hotel, and you could sit right at the piano, right on the piano with Teddy Wilson. He played for Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald or whatever.
Exciting.
That's all. Nothing profound, just love
That's
jazz.
exciting, and
Thanks.
I know George would find that just great to hear. The idea of sitting with a great jazz pianist up close in some cozy environment, that was the way it was. There are a lot of Avakian stories to tell, and I don't know how much time we have here, but
How many more do you want to tell?
no, well, I want to also do some book signing.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'll keep telling Avakian stories, but there's some good ones in here, and that one where he pretends to be Benny Goodman because the crowd is demanding that Benny Goodman say something, and his hand is bleeding from the xylophone cut, and he says to me, "It's frozen, the blood's frozen on Lionel Hampton's xylophone." I mean, you can't. These are legends, aren't they? They're just legends.
Mark,
Sure.
is there a way for folks to attend one of your workshops virtually or locally? Will you be giving any, or courses?
Workshop?
Workshop or courses?
The best idea would be come to the Colgate Writers Conference this summer for a week. And I'm going to teach this year. I'm doing a workshop. And it's a very, very prominent summer workshop we've had at Colgate for over 30 years. I don't teach every summer, but this summer I'm going to. So I hope I can tell you right now, I believe it's June 6th through 13 or something like that, 7th through 14. And it's on our campus, and a lot of excellent writers are teaching workshops. And it's packed, and they're mostly adult writers who come because they're working on manuscripts, or they want to push forward in an art they love, the short story, the poem, a novel, and it's kind of got a magic to it.
Who do you have to know to get into it?
No, it'll go up online in very soon, and you apply. You just apply.
So you have to submit a manuscript?
Yeah, you have to submit something, yes. And I don't remember what the tuition is, but it's reasonable. And there are scholarships if there's need. And I mean, there are a lot of great workshops in the Boston area. I live too far away to do one, unless some of you wanted to create one here for a weekend or something. I don't know, we could think about it.
Not the worst idea I've ever heard.
We could think about it. We could talk about that. Yeah.
Love it.
It's, but I want you to come. I want you to come to Colgate for a week. All right, should we go? And I don't know. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Please come to the solarium area. There are refreshments and books,
Thank you.
or books and refreshments.